I didn't realize I had a hoarse voice until I started talking for communion, because I don't talk a lot during the day. But then when I hear myself with the microphone on, it comes back to me. I say, ooh, whatever happened to me? Well, whatever happened to me is going to unhappen, because I'm going to be preaching about connecting the dots. One of the most difficult things for us to do is to connect dots when we're in trouble. Anybody can connect the dots when the dots are going where you expect them to go. Sometimes a simple illustration can help us understand a complex problem. I want you to see this. You got two little eaglets growing up in a nest high up on a mountain. Now the mother has taken a lot of care to make sure that the nest is soft. There's fur, there's feathers, there's grass. There's all kind of things to make the nest comfortable. The mother also provides them with food, care, comfort, protection. Everything seems to be fine while the little eaglets are growing up. And when they develop their wings to the point where they can learn to fly, something happens that is so outrageous that the little eaglet thinks it's the end of the world. What the mother does is starts to remove all of the fur, all of the feathers, all of the soft things, the grass. And now the only thing that's left is little sticks that are poking at them, and they feel the pain of it. And then the mother does something that they would have never thought themselves, and she pushes them out of the nest. Now they are tumbling down a mountain, sure that they're going to their death. Ask them to see if they could connect the dots at a time like that. They're going to die. That's what they think. But the mother then comes swooping down underneath those little eaglets and holds them up under her wings, and then lets them fall off again. And they're learning to flap their wings. What they are learning is they're learning how to soar just like their mom. But the eaglets don't know that. Not when they're falling. And the same thing is true when we face uncertainty in life. And we will. And when we face that kind of uncertainty, we discover that we don't know how to connect the dots because we don't know where it's going anymore. There's a song that goes, many things about tomorrow we don't seem to understand. There are many things about today we don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow. That's the song. And I know who holds my hand. And then there is the song that has been put to music, lead me, guide me along the way, because we can't connect the dots. Sometimes things happen in life. We get sideswiped by something. A difficulty comes and hits us. We face a mountain we didn't know was there. There's a setback that takes place, trouble, some kind of trouble, whatever it is. And we don't know how to connect the dots, and that's when we need to learn how to trust him, that he's somehow going to lead us. What we find in Leviticus is that God starts a welfare system. Now, what does that have to do with what I'm talking about? Well, it's got a lot to do with it, and you'll see in a moment. God starts a welfare system for poor people. That seems to be a problem. Let's take a look at the text. Only 2 verses, verse 9 and 10. When you reap, this is a message to the farmers and the vineyard keepers. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of the field, leave them unharvested. Nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. That's for the poor people. So the poor people can come and go to the edges of the farmland and gather for themselves the food that they're going to need. So they have to work to get it, but it's there for them. And then it goes on to say, and you shall not glean your vineyard, nor every grape of your vineyard. Leave them for the poor and the stranger, because I am the Lord your God. This represents a problem, and I want to share it with you. When Moses told the children of Israel that he was going to deliver them, that God called him to deliver them, he told them, he said, God is bringing you into a land of milk and honey. Now the children of Israel are in a wilderness. There's no milk and there's no honey. That's a problem. What's really going on? And why are there poor people? This is the question. Why are there poor people in a land you're taking me to that is known as a land of milk and honey? Well, there are faith teachers that seem to figure out a way to answer this, and I want to deal with this because I think it's important for us to know. I wrote a book years ago entitled, You Shall Know Them by Their Cadillacs, and it's all about the faith teachers and what they're teaching. But this is what they do. They take the problem of poverty and they break it down so that hopefully we will understand why people are poor. They're wrong, but this is how they handle it. They say there are two things. One is it may be secret sin. The problem with secret sin is if you have a secret sin that you don't even know about, it means you're getting punished for something you don't even know. But let's say it's a secret because it's a secret only to you. Then are you being punished because you have this secret in you? That's what they're teaching. They're teaching that if you are poor or if you are sick, it's because of secret sin and or number two, a lack of faith. Now it sounds good on paper. That's the problem with some theology. Some theology sounds good on paper and you say, yeah, that sounds right, but it's wrong. And here's why. There was a dad who took his son to Jesus who was an epileptic, and he asked if Jesus would heal him. And Jesus said, if you have faith, I can heal him. And this is what he said. He said, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. So he is admitting he has a little bit of faith. That's why he came to Jesus. But he also has a little bit of doubt. And Jesus didn't say, well, if you have a little doubt, I can't heal you. No, he healed his son, even though there was a lack of faith. That seems to be strange, but there's something even stranger in Scripture. And this is what we find. Elisha and Elijah were both great prophets, but they were poor. In fact, God provided for them using poor widow women. So they're poor. They're not poor because they have a lack of faith or because they have a secret sin. They're poor. Sometimes you are just what it is, poor. Okay, so they're poor. Now, Elijah is a very interesting character in Scripture because he's a prophet. He's not only a prophet. He performed twice as many miracles as Elijah. That's Elijah. And this is what it says. Elijah had become sick with the illness of which he would die. I don't know what the faith teachers say about that. I've read their books. I've listened to their sermons. I don't know how to handle this. Here's a man who is a man of God, who's a prophet, but he gets sick. And he dies. So the faith teachers typically would have said, well, it must have been a lack of faith or a secret sin. No, it wasn't. Because this is what it says. When he died, they buried him. As they were burying a man, they put him in the tomb of Elisha. And when the dead man touched the bones of Elijah, he was revived and stood on his feet. If Elisha died because he was sick, because he had a secret sin or a lack of faith, how could his bones retain enough power in them so the dead man touching his bones would cause him to be revived? And the teaching, the faith teaching, is wrong. And sometimes, and as you know, many times when I've listened to the faith teachers, I listen also to the congregation that they're preaching to. And when they get to these parts, I hear the people clapping their hands and shouting. I'm thinking, what are you shouting about? This is not exactly the truth. It sounds like it's good, but it's not true. It doesn't fit the scripture. But let me go beyond that. My dad died when he was 35. He had muscular dystrophy. He was ill for about 11 years. And because he died, and at the time when he died, I was 7 years old. Because he died, we had to go into welfare. Same basic welfare program I just read about in Leviticus, the 19th chapter. A program provided for the poor. But it was our government that provided welfare. And so we were on the welfare. Let me tell you something about the welfare in the 50s. They had 3 rules. We got to know the rules. Number 1, you can't own a car. Big deal. We had no money anyway. Number 2, you couldn't have a telephone. Big deal. We had no money for a phone anyway. And number 3, you couldn't have a TV. I don't know why. But one of my aunts went out and bought a TV set and brought it to us. And this is what we had to do with the TV. We took the TV and put it in a closet because we were afraid the social worker might come, and if they see we're breaking the rules by having a TV, who knows what would happen. So we would watch the cartoons in a closet. I never forgot that. Because we were on the welfare, we lived in 2.5 rooms, coal flat apartment. The only heat we had was a kerosene stove in the kitchen. We also had a tub in the kitchen, put a cover on top, and it became a table. We had an ice box. It was in the bedroom. We didn't have a refrigerator. We were poor. We were so poor, the poor people thought we were poor. But that's how we lived. We lived that way. And this is what my mother used to say. These are the rules. You can't own a car, you can't have a phone, you can't have a television. Well, my mother used to say, someday, I don't know how many times she said this, someday we will get off the welfare. And we believed her. But someday took 10 years. So this is the way we grew up. We grew up in poverty. We grew up in the slums. We grew up on streets where you wouldn't want to live there if you saw it. In fact, I've gone back years ago, and it was worse than when I was a kid. Although when I was a kid, I didn't know it was bad. I thought it was great. It was the only thing we had nothing to compare with. It was poverty. But my mother said someday we're going to be able to overcome this thing and get out and off of the welfare. While my mother was saying this, while she was telling us someday we're going to get off the welfare, we had the promises of God. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. The reason why I'm quoting this is because I want you to understand there are times when we cannot connect the dots. So we knew, because we had the promises. We went to Sunday school and we were taught these things. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. God will supply all your need. Paul wrote that. I will supply all of your need, he says, for God. And call upon me, David said, in the day of trouble I will deliver you. And the Spirit of God will lead us and guide us into all truth. We had all the promises. And with all the promises, we're still on the welfare. And with all the promises, we can't connect the dots. Welcome to the world of reality. That's the world that we live in. Not only did we have the promises, Paul had the same promises. Some of them he wrote himself. So how does Paul connect the dots when he is stoned in Lystra for preaching the gospel? What is he thinking? He can't connect the dots because he doesn't know where this is. They left him half dead. How does Paul connect the dots when he gets in a boat? Because God told him to get in that boat, and he was going to take that boat to Rome to give his testimony to the Roman emperor, but the boat that he was in sinks. How does he connect the dots? And then he gets bit by a poisonous snake. So, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, there are things that happen in life and will happen in life where we cannot connect the dots. But God can. And God does. And that's where trust comes in, because God doesn't show us the way. So many times we are in the dark. We got the light, but we're in the dark, and we don't know how something is going to turn out because something happens. A setback takes place. A curveball is thrown our way. A mountain is in the way. Something is going on, and it spells trouble. And we don't know how to get out of it. The story of Naomi. She went on to welfare. This is how. Naomi, her husband, and 2 sons left Bethlehem. By the way, Bethlehem is called the house of bread. They left Bethlehem because there was a famine, which is a sermon all in itself. How could you leave the house of bread that's in a famine? How could there be a famine in the house of bread? But that's for another day. But this is what happened. There was a famine in Bethlehem, so they left. All 4 of them left. And they went to Moab because there was no famine in Moab. When they got there, they discovered that they left one famine to go into a worse famine because Naomi's husband died and their 2 sons died. That's confusing. That's a tragedy. And now Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth are going back to the house of bread because the famine is over. So they're going back, and Naomi is so heartbroken by what happened. Who could blame her? She says, don't call me Naomi anymore. That's what she was saying. Naomi means pleasant. Don't call me pleasant anymore, for God has dealt bitterly with me. And that's the way it felt. And that's what it seemed like. But God was not through. He was not through with them. And I want you to see this. She could not connect the dots. But Ruth happened to glean in that welfare program in a field that Boaz owned. They fell in love. Long story short, they fell in love. And God starts connecting the dots from Boaz. Their children are born, and it leads to the king of Israel, David. The line of David leads to the King of Kings, Jesus. But unbeknownst to Naomi, God was actually connecting dots that she had no knowledge of. You know why the story is given to us? Because we are going to go through stuff we cannot connect the dots. So we read the story of Naomi, and faith starts to grow. Lord, if you could connect the dots for Naomi that does not know what's going on, surely by faith we can trust you to connect the dots in our lives. You're working. We can't, but you can. That's what God does. He knows how to connect the dots. When I was a custodian in Rochester, New York, for about 2 years while I was getting my bachelor's degree. I worked as the custodian, I've mentioned this before, changing light bulbs, mopping the floors, locking the doors, polishing brass, all that stuff I did. Picking up Cheerios in the nursery that the kids dropped and the parents didn't pick up. I got in there, pick them up. I volunteered to teach a senior high class while I was a custodian. So I'm in my class week after week on Sundays teaching. And there's this one boy. Of all the people that were in my class, I only remember the name of one boy. It's this boy right here, David Yonatone. The only reason why I remember him is because he sat in the back with a smirk on his face. And he injected ideas in the class to disrupt them. I took about as much of it as I could. I went to the pastor, and I told the pastor, we got to do something about this kid. He's creating a problem. And the pastor said he couldn't. I said, why? He said, because his dad is on the board. I got a quick lesson real quick in boards. His dad is on. So he stayed, and he continued doing what he was doing. I left to go to another church to be a youth pastor, then to become a pastor. And when I came to California, I checked up on David Yonatan. He was pastoring in Florida. I had no way of knowing that there were dots to connect. But God was doing something in this little rascal. He was bringing him to the place where he would give his heart to the Lord, and then he would end up serving the Lord. And I only prayed that he would be somebody in his church just like him. You don't think pastors can pray that prayer? But I want to share my story to you. That's me. You know, when I looked at this picture, I saw his hands going like this. I said, he learned the Italian when he was a little kid. He was 5 years old. He's probably telling the photographer, don't you watch your stepper now because you taking my picture. That's me. 5 or 6, I think, something like that. But the reason why I'm showing this, because there is a missionary that came to our church called Paul Verna, an older man. And when he ever came to the church, because my father was still alive, he would come to our home and pray for my father. One day while he was praying with my dad, and before he left, he gave me a little box with a white tie in it. It's not this tie, but it was just like this one. And my mother explained to me after he left that this tie is a symbol that you're going to go into the ministry. Now, as a little kid, I didn't really understand going into the ministry. I didn't fully understand, except my mother told me to end every prayer with, Lord, make me a preacher and a missionary. I was praying stuff I didn't even understand. But I prayed it every day. Every time I prayed, I always ended my prayer with, and make me a preacher and a missionary. Well, this white tie, we had 4 children, but he left a white tie for me. Now, so far the story is normal. Okay, a little boy in the house, missionary comes, leaves a white tie, there he is. 5 years pass. 10 years pass. 15 years pass. 20 years. I am now 25, 26 years old. I'm hundreds of miles away from the city where I was given this tie. I'm in Rochester, New York, as custodian. Nancy Ann wanted something from the supermarket, so I left the house, went to the supermarket, I walked into the supermarket, and there's Paul Verna. How does that happen? You know what is surprising to me? Take a look at my picture. Could anybody foresee that this kid 20 years later would be recognizable? Maybe he just recognized this when I was walking outside, I don't know. But he recognized me. And I recognized him. He's an old man when he gave me the tie, but I still recognized him. And he asked me, he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm studying to be in the ministry, and I'll never forget this. There was a smile that came to his face. And years later, when I was thinking about it, I connected it to a song he probably could have sung. God's going to finish just what he started. Even though the waters have got to be parted. Lift up your head. Don't be brokenhearted. God's going to finish what he started to do. And the only reason why I say that is I'm saying it because you're here, and I'm saying it because I want you to know that the same God that led me leads you. The same God that connected dots that I didn't even know existed is connecting dots in your life. The same God that says, I will provide for you and I will protect you and I will go with you, and wherever you go, you will be able to look towards me, to call upon the name of the Lord, to know that he will deliver. The same God, same God, same God. That's Old Testament and New Testament scriptures, but those promises are still with us today. The same God. He didn't get old and die. He's still the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the great I am, the way, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, the end, the first and the last. And he's made promises to us, to you. And the promises come out this way. I can get you through what you're going in. In fact, I may have put you in it to get you out of it. Because the same Spirit of God that drove Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, which we would think God wouldn't do a thing like that. He did. The Spirit of God drove Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted. Is the same Spirit that drove him out in power. If God gets you in, it's his job to get you out. It's a promise. We don't need to know how the dots are connected. That's not important because we have no way of knowing. We just need to believe that the dots will be connected because God's in control of our lives. We don't have to understand it. We don't have to see it. We don't have to feel it. We just need to know it. That's why God's given us faith, because faith lets us go where you can't see. And faith lets us know what you would never figure out. God's got your back. And sometimes what we do is the Word of God tells us, look up, look up, look up, lift up your head. Don't be broken hearted. Look up, look up. What we do is we look up and then we look down. And we get discouraged when we look down. Sometimes we're not looking down, we're looking around, and we get even more discouraged because people have attitudes and they have opinions about whatever it is we're going through. I could give you stories. It's true. And sometimes we don't look up, or we look up, then we look down, then we look around, and then we look inside. And we get even more discouraged because we don't have a clue as to how we're going to get through this. And that's why the song goes, lift up your head, don't be brokenhearted. God is going to finish what he started to do. Can we believe that? I only dropped by today to say one thing. God is going to finish what he started to do. He's not a man that he would lie. And if he gets you in, he'll get you out. We need to learn how to trust him. By the way, while God is getting us in and getting us out, there are so many switchbacks that are going on that we're confused. Don't worry about it. He's connecting the dots. That's all we need. We're looking up. Why? Because our redemption draws nigh. That means God's putting it together. Some through the waters, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. God's got our back. And he'll get us out. This altar is open as we sing the song. But before we do, I just want you to know what Paul said when he didn't know what was going on. He said, we're hard pressed, but we're not crushed. This is where his faith started to grow. We're perplexed, but we're not in despair. We're persecuted, but we're not forsaken. We're struck down, but we're not down. We're not destroyed. He had one little thing in his mind. Couldn't see, couldn't feel, didn't understand. But if the song was available at the time, he would have been able to sing, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. No turning back. The rocks won't turn me back. The ship won't turn me back. The poisonous snake bite won't turn me back because I have decided. This altar is open. You come as we sing.
Turn